atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by not one, but two co-hosts. First, we have University of Northern Iowa political scientist Justin Holmes, and of course, my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson. Welcome, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, I should say before we get going that I called Jay and Justin my co-hosts, but today they're going to be driving, running the show. I'll be the one in the back seat, sort of occasionally kicking the back of Jay's seat back there and maybe having him say, "Don't make me come back here." But anyway, but before I do turn things over to them with my occasional comments, I want to thank a number of people. Last week, folks might remember I mentioned that because of what I characterized as corporate media, big podcast takeover. We've been taking a serious hit in ad revenue, and which makes direct listener support more important than ever. And a bunch of people responded to that by either becoming a supporter or increasing their level of support. And that includes Nick, Spencer, Linda, and Matt. So thank you all. We really, really do appreciate that. All right. And with that, I will turn things over to, well, I don't know, whichever one of you guys wants to take things.
I think Justin's leading off here.
I think I'm leading off today.
As usual, I'm woefully unprepared. But so we'll start with Justin.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. So we've got kind of a lot going on this week, although not a lot of policy. We'll get to some of that in a little bit, but it is sort of the doldrums of political summer for some things. Got the campaigns heating up, though. So the first topic for today that we want to talk about is this Musk-Trump interview on X, formerly known as Twitter. So basically, Donald Trump sat down earlier this week, for a long interview with Elon Musk that they ended up streaming live on X after some initial tech issues, which we can maybe talk about in a minute, which, according to Trump, was viewed by something like 1 billion people. The number seems to be closer to a few million. Trump's got a long and rocky relationship with Twitter. As you might recall, he got kicked off back in 2020. Once Musk buys it, he gets invited back. But in the meantime, he basically creates his own social media site, and so doesn't really use X anymore because he owns this major stake in Truth Social, and it's a competitor. So, what are you guys' thoughts on the interview? If you sat through it in this, what are your thoughts as, kind of Twitter as a venue? Sorry, X as a venue. And, ultimately thinking about Musk, he's had a bit of a political transformation, to say the least. And so sort of where do we go with that? And what does that say for kind of the state of social media and politics?
So me first, I guess. I did not, this is how woefully unprepared I am, did not watch or listen to the interview live. I followed up on sort of the highlights of it, mainly because I'm not on Twitter, now X. Never have been and don't necessarily plan to be. So my interaction with that forum is just sort of when I have to. That said, I think it's, if he got a billion seems to be a stretch. But
yes.
If the I think the official X figures are somewhere around 1.3 million. All right, that's still 1.3 million people who tuned in. So that's not an insignificant audience. In terms of the content, I think it was sort of your standard Trump type thing, a little rambling, a little all over the place, but that's sort of what we'd come to expect. I don't know that he said anything that was, shocking, new, or the type of thing that you wouldn't just typically hear from Trump anywhere else. I do like the idea of like the long form conversation interview. I think that's good because good or bad, right? You get to see someone sort of in this lengthy conversation, and social media, something like X, gives you more ability to do that, almost kind of like what we do here, right? As opposed to a, mainstream media TV interview, which is, kind of cut and boxed to fit in a certain amount of time. So I mean, I like that part of it. Does it move the needle for a lot of voters? I would say probably not. But, Elon Musk's describing himself as a moderate. I think it is something significant. We're going to talk more about Elon Musk later. But almost, and this is kind of a weird thing, Justin. I mean, I find, of the two, Musk is the more interesting character than Trump. But, Trump's the guy running for president. So.
We haven't yet talked about. I'll bring up the two potentially illegal things that happened during the interview.
Legal? Oh no.
Yeah. Well. First off, you characterized it, and a lot of people have characterized it as an interview. Musk himself said it really wasn't an interview. He said he wants to emphasize that it's a conversation to get a feel for Donald Trump. And certainly, when you listen to all the softball questions and then extended Trump monologues that followed them, it was anything but an interview. And so nothing like really what we do here, because we actually engage in critical thinking and challenging each other. And there was essentially none of that happened in that extended conversation, if you will. And so because of that, one group at least filed a complaint with the FEC saying that this was essentially a corporate contribution, a virtual campaign event. And now I should point out there is a media exemption for that. But then again, X seems to want to be media when it suits it, but then it's just, a platform when it doesn't suit it. So I don't know if it necessarily goes anywhere, but certainly this was not an interview in any real sense. And the other illegal thing I wanted to mention was after the event, I'll call it, the UAW actually filed charges with the National Labor Relations Board against Trump and Musk for threatening to intimidate workers who go on strike. Because in part of the conversation, Musk said something to Trump about, well, I love her. Sorry, Trump said to Musk, I love it how you just, if someone's going to strike, you just fire them all. Just say you don't have a job. And of course, that's patently illegal. And so that would be potentially worker intimidation. Now, again, I don't think that goes anywhere.
Lock them up.
But so you're saying that that's okay to do? I don't know.
No, I'm saying I have grave concerns anytime we're talking about prosecuting someone for speech
or for worker. I guess so. You think that worker intimidation is not okay, or is okay because it's speech.
No, it's not. It's not okay.
Okay, but it's speech.
But it's also, well, I guess which workers is he intimidating?
Maybe Tesla workers. No, I mean.
Well, I thought Trump was going to lock them up. I miss again.
Yeah, I might have. Yeah,
I didn't do the reading, Mike. I would agree with you that it's more of a problem for Musk to say something like that than Trump.
Yeah, and Trump did most of the talking but Musk just sort of agreed with him and laughed in the background, just saying, "Oh yes, fire them all." Kind of. I can't do it. A good billionaire.
Can't do the Musk
laugh. No, but
need a cowboy hat for that. I think.
There you go.
So, I think I've got kind of thoughts on both of you. Jay kind of took a lot of what I was going to say, actually. I agree with most of what you've got. I will agree with Mike as well. I don't know, characterizing it as an interview, it's not asking the tough questions. But, I think, political figures broadly tend to go places that are congenial to them. And this just happens to be ultra congenial. I do there's an aspect of this, not that this particular one is the greatest moment in political discourse, because it's not. But I do like this notion of long form stuff. One of the things is sort of, what we used to call new media, although now it's just stuff. One of the promises there is that it does break you out of those, constraints of, TV formats and newspaper formats that are really constrained by space. When you do things online, you can run as long as you want, you can distribute them how you want, et cetera. And I do like that idea. One of the gripes about political news coverage has always been, everything is sound bites. And, the average soundbite for a presidential candidate is something like 12 seconds, in a typical TV news story. So the ability to do something, long form, more in depth, etc., the ability to do that at least, I like. From what I saw, I only watched part of it and then kind of like Jay did the highlights. There's not much here. It's not, an hour with a hostile interviewer or
it's an infomercial.
It's an infomercial. Absolutely.
It's a corporate, it's an illegal corporate contribution.
Well, yeah. I mean,
go. Just I'm sorry.
my to your points, about potential illegality. As much as I don't like corporate money in politics and stuff, I feel like that's probably a stretch. The idea that this is a corporate contribution, in the sense that, I mean, yeah, it's more softball than probably any other venue. Yes, there is this question, are they media? Are they a platform, et cetera? But I think it does run the risk of, if you start trying to penalize things like that, it runs this risk of, where do you draw a line, essentially, in terms of what would count as a contribution. If Trump were to go on Fox, which is going to be more softball than if he goes on, another network, is that a corporate contribution? Do we have some standard that we judge these things by?
If Kamala Harris goes on MSNBC.
Exactly. If Kamala sits down with Daily Kos or, whoever,
I'll answer the question for you. Kamala going on MSNBC would not be a corporate contribution. That's responsible journalism. Trump sitting down with anyone else would be a campaign contribution.
It's got to be rough to be on the right and just feel so aggrieved so often to think that the world is so incredibly unfair and against you. I'm joking. I'm joking.
The guy who brought up illegal and
I'm joking a little bit. No, I'm joking a little bit. But my point being,
let's talk about the interview.
No,
it's illegal. I mean,
my point being, let a couple of things. Number one, I said it was a stretch. First off, and so. If you want to talk about what I said, we can talk about exactly what I said. And I didn't, I said it was a stretch. But secondly, what I was pointing out was that repeatedly, this isn't a Jay thing. This is just a thing on the right. The sort of, maybe we'll get to this later in the show. I don't know. This whining on the right about, this whataboutism and how the media is so against us and the world is so against us. And I agree with Nikki Haley here this week, said, my God, maybe the Trump campaign should just shut up with all the whining about how the world is so against us. And I guess that's what I found almost kind of funny about this interview is we have here two straight white male billionaires just so aggrieved about how awful the world is and how things are so unfair. And oh my God, cry me a river for these guys.
I think it's on brand for both of them, and that's, I think, Trump's whole story. And Musk has really leaned into that, thinking about kind of his movement a little bit. I don't know with him, he's a little enigmatic in certain ways, I suppose, for somebody that is as loud and out there and present as he is. But, there's a part of me that wonders if, some of his political pivot isn't sort of that, hey, there's a market there. I don't know what the guy believes in his heart and what he doesn't. But certainly over the last, 5 or 6 years, he's really moved. And, his whole buying Twitter thing was essentially, honked off user that, oh, gosh, I'm so oppressed and, so on and so forth. I was a hardcore Twitter user for quite some time, probably to my detriment in a lot of ways, and left not immediately after Musk, but there were some, palpable changes, and we can maybe talk about that more in a minute. But ultimately, I mean, the Musk story was sort of, hey, I'm not happy with how this is run. I'm so, put down, et cetera. From the time that I spent, on Twitter, which was a lot, my question was always, what is it that you can't say on Twitter?
Well,
still Twitter.
Part of it is you couldn't be Donald Trump.
Well, you couldn't be Donald Trump. And
here's the problem, right? I mean,
there were a few high-profile bannings, but for gosh sakes, among the kind of rank and file people, it was just this giant collection of people yelling about how canceled they are on the platform.
I think there's some of the things you couldn't say are Hunter Biden's laptop is real. You couldn't say things like, COVID lockdowns don't work. You couldn't say vaccine requirements don't provide the public safety that people say they do. Those are some of the things that you couldn't say.
Mm-hmm.
So
on the other hand, I reported people for advocating genocide who didn't even get sent to timeout.
Well, exactly. That's exactly my point, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose the moderation is perhaps uneven, but
they allowed terrorists on there, but not Donald Trump because he's beyond the pale.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I mean, this was basically this was like more right wing genocide kind of stuff. But it's I don't know. I mean, it seemed like fine. There are a few carve outs there, but for gosh sakes, people were out and loud and proud for the most part. And I mean, Trump got it hard, and a couple other people, but I don't know. I mean,
well, you can't say the election's stolen. You couldn't say that. I guess that was part of what got Donald Trump in trouble. But
yeah, everybody else could. Yeah.
No, yes and no, and I can tell you, I can point you to some legal documents in a bunch of different cases of people who were ramped down, deplatformed, that sort of thing, because of what they were saying. This was mostly in the COVID context.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it wasn't hate speech. It was speech that the administration disagreed with.
I wonder. I think the problem with a lot of these arguments on both sides is that they tend to be based on very limited anecdotal evidence. And so I'm not saying that you're wrong, Jay. What I'm saying is that that's not a good basis for an argument. Well, a couple of guys I know got banned and they're conservatives, therefore. And so when I'm dealing with, let me just finish. Let me just finish. So what I'm saying is that it makes sense to kind of pull back and take a more systematic look. And there was a study a few years ago by MIT and Yale professors about Twitter's possible bias against conservatives. And what they found, a couple of things important. Number one, they found, yes, there was a significant disparity between how many self-identified Democrats and Republicans were banned. A pretty significant one, something like 7.7% of Democrats, 35.6%. I don't know exactly how they're getting those percentages, but they also pointed out that they found that Republicans on Twitter shared substantially more misinformation news. Now, again, that gets into how do you define that thing. But again, and when you say it's like, when you're watching a football game, why do they keep on calling our team for being offsides more? Are they biased against us? Well, maybe, or maybe your team's offsides more. And so what I'm saying is not that you're wrong, but that it's important to kind of pull back a little bit and not rely on these kind of isolated anecdotes, which may or may not reflect the larger reality.
So my one isolated anecdote was there was this one guy they banned, and he happened to be the president of the freaking United States. I mean, that's sort of, I'm saying this isn't like, hey, this guy my cousin knows from work. I mean, that's my main one. I can give you a bunch of other litigants in cases in Murphy versus Missouri. There was the Ohio case, similar where, and again, this is not made up. This is, we've got it all, and especially Murphy versus Missouri, they've got it all in emails. All right. And if you say, geez, why are conservatives so whiny? Well, if those are the numbers, then, well, yeah, shouldn't you be a little whiny to say? And I'm not saying it's a good campaign strategy, because I don't think it is, but to say that, listen, there's no bias here, and if there's any bias, it's because you were all, engaging in misinformation. And to the point of, well, who determines what what is misinformation? And I think we know the answer to that. It's not conservatives who determine what misinformation is. And in fact, a lot of what was deemed as misinformation, hey, maybe COVID originated in a lab leak, maybe the laptop is real. maybe lockdowns don't help as much as they're being touted, and maybe there's an offsetting damage to mental health in them. These are the kind of things that were downgraded, that were labeled misinformation and or hate speech. We can talk about that in the next part where we talk about Musk and his lawsuit. But
let's be clear. Donald Trump was not banned. Donald Trump was not banned for misinformation. Donald Trump was banned from Twitter to the risk of incitement of violence after January 6th. So, I mean, I didn't think this was the conversation we were going to have, but you're throwing a lot of things.
You asked for an example of people who had been banned and why
no one should be banned from Twitter. Well, I mean, is it at least plausible that the misinformation and that incitements of violence are not equally distributed among conservatives and liberals, or is that just beyond belief?
Possible, but I guess I would look at, who was the Democratic Congresswoman urging people to get in their face?
Oh, I know you mean. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's that. I think you guys both really misunderstand how a good deal of the American people feel about what's been going on the past 4 years. When we talk about the sense of grievance, you can discount it and say, oh no, it's all just made up, but it's not. Again, if you want to say this is just anecdotal, fine, but I can name you plenty of people who lost their jobs because they refused to get a vaccine, and their company then repealed the vaccine mandate like a month afterwards. I can give you laundry lists of, again, this is weird. This is just kind of part of my freedom defense journey that I've been on over the last couple of years. And I can tell you it wasn't always like this, but it is now. So I think if you want to say it's just anecdotal, fine. But I think there's the fact that Donald Trump is the candidate, again, speaks to the feeling that it's out there.
Yeah, well, maybe it speaks more to problems with the primary system and who gets to select the candidates. And I would argue certainly at least a fair amount of that as well, because when you take a look at Donald Trump's negatives, his unpopularity is pretty huge. And if you're actually Republicans and you want to pick somebody who has a good chance of winning the election, Donald Trump might not be the first person. He appeals to a certain type of American, certainly, and
sure,
close to half the country.
But the way he was selected, and I'm no fan of Donald Trump. I voted against him in the primary, but that's the point. He became the nominee through a system of primaries, and people voted for him, right? I mean, they may be short-sighted. He may not be the best candidate, but that's who they voted for. And that was the process that they used. It was a democratic process. He had people challenging him. There was a lot of money spent on either end. He came out on top. So that's what I'm saying is that says something when you have and he didn't just, I mean, as he would say, he didn't just win by little, he won by a lot everywhere, right? So he beat his main opponent significantly in her home state. That says something.
Are you talking about in 2016?
No, I'm talking about this year.
Well, yeah, but that's not even a see, and that's the thing. I think this idea that there would be any kind of a fair contest between Donald Trump and anyone else, given the disparities in money and fame and reach and that sort of thing, is just that's not really. And I'm not saying that there's any solution to that necessarily, but the idea that anyone could have challenged Donald Trump and the voters just made their choice. I mean, they made their choice based on Donald Trump having this enormous, huge megaphone where he can get stuff out there, and anyone else who might want to challenge him not having nearly, and that makes a real difference.
But doesn't that same idea translate? If you're talking about he has huge negatives, shouldn't those negatives go along with that big microphone or that big megaphone? Which I think Donald Trump, I'm sure, appreciates you using that metaphor. But right. I mean, look, it's part of him also voted because, hey, look, this guy was president for 4 years and we liked what he did.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask both you guys is it seems strange to me, not really strange, but maybe in a way, that when you think about Elon Musk and his business interests in that, in so many ways, he seems much more aligned, you would expect, with Democrats. In fact, he said, right, he voted for,
oh God, yes.
He voted for Biden. He voted for Hillary Clinton. He's voted overwhelmingly for Democrats in his words. But then apparently he was miffed by not being invited to that August 2021 EV summit, which was kind of weird. And that was apparently because he runs a non-union shop and so forth, which I think is an incredible miscalculation on the Biden administration's part. But maybe they said, well, UAW is more important to us than Elon Musk, and maybe that's okay. But then there's the whole anti-trans thing, right, with his trans daughter, who I guess Musk told Jordan Peterson that that's why he became more conservative. He said he wanted to destroy the woke mind virus after that. And, some people might say, well, here's a guy who can't accept his kid's gender identity and he needs someone or needs something to blame. And, well, here we go. We got the woke mind virus. It's not that my kid maybe actually identifies as female, but I can't accept that. So let's just say that the left is insane. And maybe some combination of that. But when you think in terms of policy, certainly the Biden administration's way more EV friendly than a Trump administration would be. And in fact, one of the reasons why I think Musk was upset with the Biden administration is they didn't push nearly as hard for a carbon tax as Musk would have wanted. And certainly that's something that would be anathema to a Trump administration.
I was just reading Trump's Agenda 47 last night, and kind of thinking about today. And one of the specific things on there is about rolling back the EV mandate, that Biden has. So, I think I agree with a lot of what you've got there with Musk. There has been a transformation in certain things. I mean, I think the LGBT issues in particular, there's always a tweet, you can dig them up, and somebody keeps reposting this one from about 6 years ago about, it's Tesla with rainbow flags and stuff, that he had posted about, we're welcoming for everybody. And, he's done, kind of a 180 on that. I don't want
to interrupt, but just to consider, can both be true, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, there is that whole, separating the LGB from the T, I suppose, but he certainly wouldn't post anything like that now, is, kind of more where I'm going. I think in some ways, I mean, his politics are messier. I think the old version reminds me a little bit of sort of the kind of stereotypical Bay Area tech bro that, sort of used to be, almost more libertarian, generally socially pretty liberal. But, the guy runs a giant business and wants to do things on the cheap and make as much money as possible. And so, policy wise, I think he's always had certain kind of conservative leanings. That kind of stuff, doesn't get the kind of press and attention. And I don't know if it was spoken with the same passion, but I think there were probably certain alignments there to begin with, not running a union shop, et cetera. I do wonder, if in terms of the health of his core business, because certainly X is not that. It's kind of a money pit, it looks like. But I think he is causing potential problems for the Tesla brand. You've got a company that was pretty beloved by liberals and selling a product that conservatives just aren't very interested in for the most part. I'm sure there are some conservatives that drive Teslas. I actually saw a picture of a wrapped one with a big Trump sign on it, the other day and stuff, a Cybertruck. But, ultimately, I think he's got this problem where, as he is more and more politically outspoken, he does seem to be turning off a lot of the core market for electric cars. And he's doing that in a time where suddenly lots and lots of companies are competing. Tesla had this sort of first mover advantage where, you think electric car and you think Tesla. Suddenly lots of people are doing that. And there are plenty of other places where you can go to get that and not have the politics along with it. Speaking anecdotally, because, again, I don't have data here, but, I know several people who own Teslas that won't buy another one, after that. But at the same time, because of the car, because of Musk, ultimately,
okay. I'll submit that's weird, but go ahead.
Hey, that's the political word of the
any word of the not drinking Bud Light
word of the season. But well, I mean, people, they, certainly as we have seen, it's not constrained to the left that people will do business with companies that have values that they like. and I think it's a PR problem. I always thought Tesla was going to have this problem a little bit, that everybody else was going to catch up in terms of offering the same technology, but he seems to be actively running people off and not picking up. There is this not picking up other markets. Seems to be this kind of fixation with oil and coal and things like that, among a subset of the population. And I guess unless you could have a Tesla that rolls coal or something like that, you're just not going to sell it.
But guys, before we move on from this, I wanted to say that on the cultural things that Jay brought up, I think I came off as more unsympathetic than I actually am, because Jay, I do think you have a point, and I think it's reasonable to make a case that in some parts of the left, the sort of not just the identity politics, but the kind of basket of deplorables sort of thing that does go, in my view, too far in some instances, and it does alienate people. And so I wanted to make that clarification, because I do think there really is something to that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and yeah, I mean, we can talk offline, or I could set up plenty of interviews with folks who could tell their tale. But and don't get me started. There's a new sanctions against folks who are not advocating strenuously enough for peace in Gaza. But that can be a story for another day. But so anyway, speaking of Elon Musk, let's continue this. This goes from less the political and more his business stuff. But he recently sued a nonprofit advertising initiative, the World Federation of Advertisers, for essentially antitrust violations, alleging that they had engaged in a massive advertising boycott to force the platform to maintain certain safety standards. Now, again, we can talk about what those safety standards are. And also this sort of arm of the I goofed this all up. See, that's why you shouldn't have me do the interviews. World Federation for Advertisers had this initiative called the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, with the clunky acronym GARM. And not long after this suit, which was filed last week, GARM has now disorganized itself. It's sort of described itself as sort of a plucky little nonprofit that has now been shut down by the evil Elon Musk. But anyway, this is a different kind of suit in that, there's not a real clear consumer detriment at this point, right? And these folks are saying, look, we just don't want to advertise on X because, in their words, I mean, the basis of this pullback was concerns about product placement, what type of ads or posts their products are close to. For example, things like child pornography and terrorism and genocide and all that sort of thing, which they don't want associated with their corporate brands. So that said, I'll turn it over to you guys. Because Justin, in particular, you seemed most interested in this story.
Yeah, I in particular wanted to hear kind of your take on it, but I'll give some of my take.
No, I'll give you my. That's just my the background. I'll give you.
It's
really happening in a minute.
I'm interested in this as somebody who's not a lawyer, in part, because the first take on this, or the first instance or reporting on this that I saw, struck me as sort of fundamentally absurd. And I may have come around a little bit, but I'm not quite sure on that. But, the kind of absurd part to me is just, that, nobody has an obligation to advertise on this guy's platform. And you don't have an obligation to advertise on any platform. And, Musk has had, I think, this really strained relationship kind of from the get-go with advertisers. And I don't think, he really completely understood the nature of the business that he was getting into with this. I mean, there's some evidence that the whole buying it was sort of a bluff that went too far a little bit. But, ultimately, it was an ad-based business. And, it's through a variety of things, not just content. He's managed to run off most of your major advertisers. And, I mean, to a large extent, hey, if I were, I'm not even a user anymore, but if I were an advertiser, there is a lot there that I would have concerns about being associated with.
What's if I can, I don't want to interrupt you, but what's
ahead.
changed since, and I'm asking this just because I wasn't on Twitter before and I'm not on X now. What's changed between when Musk took over?
So, I can give you a couple things. One is, I think there is a prevalence of kind of an increased amount of kind of racist, anti-Semitic content, et cetera. Again, counts are hard on that sort of thing, but, there was always stuff that was pretty over the top. And, again, whether or not you can say that, from a First Amendment point, of course you can. As I always tell my students, I mean, there's not much that's not covered from government, as far as that goes. You can be out and loud and proud and racist as much as you want. And, it's not very nice, but it's, not something you can be stopped from. With the platform, on the other hand, I mean, certainly they have the ability to moderate, and certainly Musk has, there are things that he blocks as well, for as much as a free speech champion as he is. So there is more of that content, I think, and the really egregious stuff, is out there. You can say the N-word on Twitter now, and you couldn't really before. That was one that was, would be a potential issue. And so I think, that from a content standpoint, it's that sort of stuff. Again, this is one of those things, because you're dealing with something so big, quantifying it becomes very hard, and the other thing is, how much reach of this is there? For as much as we talk X in terms of politics, the number of political users is like smaller than you would think, actually. That's the stuff that gets a lot of attention in general, and certainly was driving a lot of the conversation, in the traditional media. But there is a lot of Twitter that's not that. But there's enough of that you're going to get screenshots of, the brand new Jeep Cherokee brought to you by this awful post, or something like that. I'm pondering how far I want to go with that, but we'll just leave it there, I think. Do you want that association?
Jeep isn't one of our advertisers, so
they're not one. Yeah. It was Jeep or Wheat Thins. I don't know. But at any Wheat Thins brought to you by Ethnic Cleansing. Probably not a corporate slogan that you want to be associated with. The other couple things here, though, one advertiser issue that's gotten, I think, less attention is customer service kind of stuff. And this was something that was it was discussed a little bit during the takeover. But, one of the things that Musk did was sack a whole bunch of people. And, there were a couple of reasons for this. One is, hey, anybody that supports the woke mind virus, they're gone. And these, moderators that I don't like, they're gone, et cetera. Part of it was that, Twitter was never profitable. It was never a winning business in the way that, say, Facebook was. I mean, they were always running in the red pretty much. So certainly trimming some stuff was probably important. The problem is, there is like a customer service team for advertisers, and he sacked almost all of that office. And I was hearing from some advertising people that just using the actual interface had become unworkable, and nobody could answer that. Then there's the fact that, he basically dropped an F-bomb in terms of, advertisers a couple weeks ago, F those guys, more or less. I don't remember which, or they can F themselves. I forget the exact phrasing, but there was.
I think you got it. I think you had it. Yes. The second time, I think, was the.
one or the other.
Yeah.
So, so I think all of that, I think kind of is stewing together. I mean, there's, there's concerns about that association. And I guess all of this, then the backdrop, if you are a big corporate client, one of the things that was sort of striking is how little of a budget Twitter was for most of their advertising. If you look at the big companies, it was really nothing for them to walk away.
Yeah.
So if you look at this, kind of the risk reward here, hey, this is 1% of my advertising. There's a potential downside, even if it's just the potential downside here of being associated with something racist. I think actually a point I was going to make before, I don't know so much that it's that, lots of people would natively see it But you do have, everything is out there. It gets screenshotted, and suddenly this is going to be everywhere.
Right.
And so I think that's ultimately what's changed. Is sort of there is a content change. Things are racier in some areas. There's an attitude change, and there's customer service change.
Racier or raciester?
Raciester. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. And that's
spicy.
Well, yeah, because the one, I could see how there could be different communities that would take offense to one or the other, but my sense is that one ought to be more offensive than the other. But regardless,
regardless.
But by that I mean I typically don't have any strong objections to racy speech.
Yes,
I would have objections to racist speech. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. So I guess before I throw it back to Jay, or certainly I can chime in on this as well. So I guess my initial position is this is just dumb. Was my first thought that this is this idea that hey you're compelled to support my platform is just silly. I mean, advertisers can do what they want, and it's a free market, and blah blah blah. Where I wanted to hear from you is more this kind of RICO angle. Which the more I think about it, I mean, there is something vaguely compelling about that. I don't know that it's a solid legal theory. One of the people I used to follow on Twitter actually was a guy named Ken White, who's a lawyer out of Los Angeles. Definitely liberal, but, his sort of claim to fame, it seemed like, was, you'd have people all the time talking about Trump and RICO, and his thing was, it's not RICO. It's like, it's never RICO. Which was kind of my nexus for this is, my fondest memories of Twitter were this guy talking about RICO, I guess. So that was kind of where I was curious, is this RICO claim, is this something that actually has legal merit? Is it just a shot in the dark?
I would say, look, as someone who is not an antitrust expert, because antitrust is really sort of a specialized field, and
you're closer than I am, though.
Yeah, and I look, I took the class in law school, and I got an A in it.
Well, you're an expert.
But that was some time ago, and I don't really practice in that area much. But one thing I do know, I do see a fair number of people who try to turn whatever civil claims, breaches of contract, tortious interference things into RICO claims, and they are typically unsuccessful. RICO is a high bar to prove. You have to prove a pattern of conduct against you have to have an organization, a conspiracy, several different acts. There's a whole lot of things you need to go through to prove a RICO charge. So I would say, and again, all we've got to go on is the complaint right now, but I think a RICO claim is a stretch. I think that's one of the things you put in these kind of cases often for, let's say, shock value or the just risk, right? Of look, it's probably 95% chance that, a RICO charge wouldn't stick, but there's 5% chance that it might, right? So,
and I can write this up in an afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's not going to cost you a whole lot more to put that in the complaint. If it gets dismissed, it gets dismissed. And I would say overall, again, based on my antitrust knowledge, which, we'll say is more than Justin's and more than Mike's, but probably less than Elon Musk's, is that this is a weak antitrust case. But I don't think he's doing it to necessarily win an antitrust case. I do think he's doing it more for some of the purposes that I talked about earlier. I think he's trying to shine a light on some practices that companies deny are happening, and they are. So particularly this World Advertising Federation and GARM, the now disbanded as of like 2 days ago, GARM. I think there's some issues there that should be of concern to people. If you look, there's the House Judiciary Committee did a report on this, and you can see it's, in depth, a lot of the emails back and forth among these folks. And again, the emails are what they are, and you can read them for however you want to read them. But when you're talking about, is there an anti-conservative bias out there? Are there things where things that had been on Twitter, like relating to COVID lockdowns, which these folks described as hate speech. All right, that this has to be stopped. That I think is what his bigger goal is to shine a light on some of this. I'm doubtful on the his likelihood of prevailing legally.
I mean, are there? So you're saying there's more of a PR thing, essentially?
Yeah, I don't know if PR is
PR is maybe not the way to put it.
Yeah, but
it's maybe unkind. But I mean, are there other? I mean, setting aside the RICO element, I mean, are there other? Other.
I mean, no, you can. I mean, you can have
here?
it's a colorable antitrust claim, right? To say these folks have all conspired to boycott my company. But there's a lot of things you have to get through to prove that it's, one, they're actually boycotting, and it's not as you say. They just say, listen, we've decided this isn't a great place for us to advertise because of X, Y, Z and stuff we might be, posted next to. You have to show that there's, as you said, there's a whole lot of their ad spending doesn't go there. And maybe they just said, look, we think we're better off redirecting it somewhere else. There's the argument that you didn't make, but I'll make it for you.
Oh, great.
that listen, since the demographics of people who are on X has changed since Musk took over, like you, some companies may say, look, these, we're just not hitting our target demographic there anymore, or they may say, listen, we're concerned about getting beat up by our woke customers, and they're making choices not to do that. And that in and of itself isn't going to be an antitrust violation. Now, that said, some of the folks he sued, for example, that he included in the conspiracy, CVS Health, Mars, Unilever, some of these big corporations they're not, ironically, not like Tesla, which I think does have a greater sensitivity to the politics stuff. This is sort of, big brands that theoretically kind of everybody buys. But the point I want to make about the GARM is, and this is what I think Musk is up to, is its initial purpose, its stated purpose, and this is what you said, Justin, and it makes perfect sense, right? Look, advertisers don't want their brand associated with speech, which is maybe protected by the First Amendment, may be okay under Twitter's policies, but they find abhorrent and a lot of people would find offensive. And that's a completely fair complaint to have, and it's a good idea to have this sort of organization that says, listen, we're going to monitor this to make sure that our brands are not associated with this type of speech. But when you dig deeper, I think that's where the problem gets to be, is that I think so often this claim of whoa, we're concerned about our brand being associated with hate speech, when you look at what the hate speech is, and look at what some of GARM's recommendations have been over the last couple of years, and places they've, again, organizations they've accused of misinformation and so forth, misinformation that turned out to actually be information. You can see an agenda, and I think that's what he's trying to do is say there is an agenda out there in corporate America, and my God, if we can't rely on the corporate advertisers to tell us the truth, who can we count on anymore? That's my 2 cents. Where's Mike? Yeah.
I'll just add one thing, sort of, related, but not on the merits per se. But, in this case, the defendants, by my calculation, are from, let's see, Belgium, Denmark, London, Virginia, and Rhode Island. X, at least for now, is headquartered in San Francisco. So naturally, the lawsuit was filed in the Northern District of Texas. Because, hey, if you're a conservative, you want Reed O'Connor hearing your case, although that didn't work out because after it turned out that he owns shares, I believe, in both Tesla and Unilever, both sides.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I know, Jay, that's one thing you and I think, agree on. This whole forum shopping thing is deeply unfortunate, right?
Well, and look, but there's remedies for that, and we may see that, right, from some of these defendants may move to dismiss, alleging it may have been brought in the wrong forum. I haven't dug deep into that as to whether it's properly brought in Northern District of Texas or not. When you are some of these big national or international companies, I mean, one of the downside is you do sort of expose yourself to suit in a whole lot of places. And you can say, where the harm took place could be a whole lot of places. So I haven't done a deep dive on that, but there's remedies to that. And look, as an attorney, right, and we all frown on forum shopping, but at the same time, if you have a client and you say, listen, look, we understand let's say your client is Elon Musk, and say, well, we got two choices for jurisdiction, Elon. We could bring it in the Northern District of California or the Northern District of Texas. If if it goes on appeal, one will go to the Ninth Circuit, the other will go to the Fifth. If I'm a lawyer, I'm not doing my job. If there is a, legally defensible, colorable claim to jurisdiction in one place, but you just choose to bring it in the form that's more convenient for the defendant.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I certainly wouldn't blame the attorneys or the clients for choosing the best forum for them. To me, it's more just the fault of the system that allows that sort of forum shopping.
Yeah.
This seems like a thing too. I agree with you. In terms of potential forum shopping, but you do get into this scenario where where is Twitter? On some level, or X, I guess Twitter's no more, but it has a headquarters of sort, but it also has reach, pretty much everywhere. I don't know, is that attached jurisdiction at that point because, hey, it's impacting, users all over the world, or it's just,
to some extent, yes. The general rule with jurisdiction of in personam jurisdiction is if you have substantial or ongoing business contacts in a certain state, then you can reasonably anticipate being hailed into that forum. And I think in a lot of cases, look, these companies do business everywhere, and it's typically you bring the suit where the defendant can be served, where you've got in personam jurisdiction over the defendant. So yeah, I think that's an argument. Now, as far as the forums folks, again, I that might be a little trickier. I don't know where all they do business, but yeah, just as Twitter could be sued probably most anywhere in the United States because of its reach. I think a lot, companies like CVS and Unilever also can be.
You can buy Ben & Jerry's in all 50 states from Unilever, so yeah.
Well, guys, I think we probably have time to do one more story on the on our weekend show before we kind of push the rest into the midweek. And
what's it going to be?
Is that I believe that's the Biden announcement about nowadays it's the Biden-Harris administration. But to be fair, Kamala Harris has kind of linked herself to this.
The Harris-Biden administration.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, this is that time of year where we don't have a lot of policy to talk. We've got, congressional recesses and gosh, it's, the fall of an election year where not a whole lot is going to happen or soon to be fall. But we did actually have one sort of big policy thing that did pop this week. And that's that President Biden announced a deal with pharmaceutical manufacturers to cut prices on 10 widely used medications for people that are enrolled in Medicare. So, as it stands right now, the details are a little bit iffy. There are 10 specific drugs named, but, it seems to be that the cuts are projected to be for these 10 drugs in the kind of 35 to 70% range in the cost. And there's big money at stake here. These are drugs that Americans currently spend $50 billion a year on. Kind of the question here, is, this is definitely an area of concern for people. Certainly healthcare costs have been, among other costs, but healthcare costs have been a concern for a long time. What do we think of this policy area? It's something that, I think, both parties complain about. Is this a solution? Are there other solutions, et cetera?
So I'll weigh in first. I guess my first thought is I think this type of, if you want to have a negotiation, and if it's a arm's length fair negotiation, to the extent any negotiation with your ultimate regulator can be fair, I think that's the preferable route to take as opposed to what was in the Inflation Reduction Act, right, which was the mandatory bargaining on certain drugs. And, coupled with and if you don't, we will hit you with essentially a 100% tax. So if the companies can live with this and, saves the taxpayers money, I think that's probably fine. The companies can make their own calculations as to whether this is workable and whether they lose money on this and make it up on something else. A lot of it goes to what those drugs are. When those drugs are coming off of IP protection anyway, right? And there are a whole lot of drugs out there which are pretty already cheap and plentiful. One, because their patents have expired, and two, because they are largely they're popular and needed, right? Mm-hmm. You're much better off being like me, having high blood pressure and high cholesterol, which like about a zillion people have. I mean, there's a mass market for this and a lot of people buying it so that companies can make money in volume sales, as opposed to being someone with some rare genetic disorder, which, only 3 people in the country have. The one I can get, my high blood pressure meds for something like, $3 a month. And, these other ones, if you have the rare disease or something that is some brand new medical advancement that is still protected and the company's still trying to recover its investment on that, that's when you get into those, staggering kind of, it's, $25,000 a month or something like that. So my basic sense of look, I've got no problem with negotiation so long as it is actual negotiation and not just, political browbeating.
And to be clear, I think that the bipartisanship of this thing is pretty obvious. I mean, Donald Trump said that on day one, if he's reelected, of course he will be, because if he's not, it's fraud, right? But on day one, he said he would sign an executive order to taking on big pharma and ending global freeloading. That would essentially require, and Jay, you'll love this, I'm sure, that the U.S. would only pay the best price that companies offer to other countries around the globe because we're tired of getting ripped off, is in Donald Trump's language. Now,
I do actually. I do that is an interesting approach because, yeah, it is a strange situation where, the only market where some of these drug makers can recoup their investmts is the U.S.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, we're talking like there's one blood thinner, Eliquis, I believe it's called. Eliquis, there you go. It's year's supply in the U.S. averages $7,100. In Japan, it's $940, 86% less. In Canada, it's 87% less. In Germany, it's like 90% less. And there are a bunch of drugs like that. And so this is one of these places where I certainly agree with Trump that the drug companies are recouping, if there are losses that they're suffering in other countries, they're recouping them by charging way more to the U.S. And this is a case where I think, we shouldn't have to subsidize losses that these companies are making in other countries. And not only that, but it's not like the pharmaceutical industry is particularly unprofitable. It's not like, and maybe we'll talk about this in the next show, with like grocery prices and so-called price gouging. Those margins are like super small. 1%, 2%, 3%. Whereas when you look at big pharma, their margins are pretty darn healthy. Now, they can be exaggerated. It depends on how you do the comparison, but they're doing pretty well. And so this is one of these instances where I think this seems to be, we can haggle over the details. And Jay, I think there's something to be said for how we structure the negotiation, certainly. But I don't think there's really any question what Big Pharma is doing is they're making up their losses in most of the rest of the developed world by jacking up prices on U.S. consumers.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think, a lot of those too, again, I think, if they have a whole portfolio, certainly, it makes sense. You're going to push profit on some things than others. But, if you look at things like insulin, for example, the pricing on that, it's not only like not commensurate with what it costs to make, but most of the research on that's been done forever. Like there aren't, there are these like minor refinements, here and there. It's not like they're cooking up some whole new category of medicine or something like that, and so that kind of thing, I think particularly gets people riled.
Well, I think also, and again, I know a little bit about insulin prices, but so often if you do have good insurance, insulin is at a significant discount. If you're buying through a government, federally insured or federally certified healthcare facility, health FQHC, health center, yeah, it can be incredibly cheap. And then the result is that the slack is made up on people who either are uninsured or have bad insurance or something like that. That's so yeah.
And that's a lot of healthcare. I mean, office visits and things like that too, or procedures. It's like on the rare occasion that I look at a bill for something, there's a huge write-off there.
Exactly, yeah.
Kind of in insurance. It's not just drugs; it's kind of all of it.
And that's why I think it's so much of a bipartisan thing, because we can both agree that this is a market that is not functioning very well for so many reasons. The idea that there is not anything close to a price, not just for insulin, but for so many other things. It's just insane how trying to figure out what things actually cost and how that works out. And when you have a market that I think is so disorganized and so dysfunctional, it's not surprising that we see high prices and issues, all these sort of issues that we're getting.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there too. And I would be for more market transparency. And again, I think that's drug companies are also in a strange position compared to a lot of other manufacturers, right? It's a little more like tech in that there's a whole lot of money that is pumped into something in its initial phases, which could take years and years and years, and you don't necessarily know that it's going to work. So you have other things in the pipeline always hoping that they'll work, and you have other things out there that you know are going to work, and you have to manage that risk that you always have. And you always have drugs that are then coming off patent that you only have so long to recapture your investment or make a profit or however you want to describe it. That again, it's not only is it a different market, it's a different industry just because of
and that's why I said a lot of people who point to what they believe are colossal profits for big pharma. When you actually take a look at the studies that try to control for those sort of things like R&D spending and similar kind of profiles, what you find is that most studies that, big pharma is a little bit more profitable, but not like a ton more. One study I said like 3.6% more profitable than similar type industries in terms of size and R&D. So it's not like they're just printing money practically, but they're not suffering in any major way.
Right. But if you limit it back to, one hit drug or something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Then you can say, yes, they're incredibly profitable making,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note of general agreement, how about we wrap things up? There's certainly a lot more we wanted to get into, and that we will
even get to talk about a price gouging.
That's a good reason for people.
I thought Elon Musk would be so exciting.
I think we all thought that, right? Certainly Elon thinks that. But anyway, we will get to price gouging, right? And I think we're going to talk about Donald Trump's economic speech and some other stuff as well on the midweek show. So if you are not a supporter and you want to get that whole thing, well, you can become a supporter. We would appreciate that. And we always put the support links in the show notes. So check that out. And you'll also get ad-free versions of what we put out and various other things like the Discord. We had this incredible, interesting discussion about billionaires on the moral rightness of billionaires' existence on the Discord. It was a lot of fun. My inner Marxist came out a little bit, but that's just one of the things you can get. Hope you'll check it out. And of course, as always, if you're not in a position to support us financially, but you do want to get access to the full midweek show, just let me know. Send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get that set up for you. And as always, we would really appreciate, whether you're a supporter or not, if you subscribe, rate, and review us. That makes a big difference. So please do that if you haven't already or if it's been a while. And finally, of course, we always want to put out a special thanks to our fantastic executive producer team. They are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. And we'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,